Recently, a homicide occurred in Bincheng. Not only did the deceased have a special identity, but even the weapon used to kill the deceased was also very special. A common ancient cold weapon. Arrow. The criminal police in Bincheng launched an investigation, but the case reached a deadlock at one point. As Captain Sinan scratched his head, a person appeared and finally, a hidden major case surfaced. But why is the art style getting worse and worse? Clearly, Sinan is the captain, right? Ah. No. My wife is the eldest. Wife, you are always right. Ouch. This picture cannot be viewed. From then on, their captain dared not be mischievous anymore. Keywords of the novel. Team leader, your lady comes to monitor again without pop-ups. Team leader, your lady comes to monitor again. Download the complete text. Team leader, your lady comes to monitor again. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1001. No fight, no acquaintance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1001. No fight, no acquaintance. Boss, we have surveyed the site 3 times. What should we do now? Boss, the forensic department has said that with just this force, it must not have been pierced with bare hands. Boss, the trace inspection team said. Stop. A shout of annoyance rang out, and there was a sudden silence in the noisy office of the Serious Crime Division of the Binhai City Bureau. Keep going, I'll go smoke a cigarette and come back. The man, who was being watched by everyone, sighed dejectedly, waved his hand, and walked out. I've never seen my boss so haggard before. I muttered to myself as the figure disappeared from the door. Puff. A burst of laughter erupted, and others couldn't help but laugh. The suppressed atmosphere also eased slightly. Xiao Tian is not right. The leader's decadent demeanor, coupled with that face, can attract a bunch of fans. Okay, said a handsome young man with a black face and a furry head, suppressing a smile. You still have the mood to grind your teeth. Let's work quickly. A slightly older man sighed, pinched his brows, and said wearily, if there's no progress, the boss will explode. Chen, who do you think would use an ancient arrow to kill someone? A fair-faced, somewhat handsome young man approached the person who had just spoken and spoke in confusion. Experts think it's a bit unbelievable. For over 1,000 years, it's a national treasure that has been used as a murder weapon. It's really heartbreaking. The person named Chen sighed again. Chen Zhen, the oldest elder brother in the serious crime unit, but he is only 30.5 or 6 years old. Their captain, who was just mentioned for smoking, is named Sinan. He is an elite member of the police force who is in his 20s and 8 years old. At this moment, he is blowing a cold breeze in the police station courtyard. Binhai, as a coastal city, although winter is not particularly cold, wind is essential. It's already the end of November now, and the snow is about to fall. Yuan Boss Hen. At this moment, Sinan threw his cigarette butt into the trash can, turned around and walked back, his mind full of the case. The name being muttered on is none other than the deceased of this case, the general consultant of the Binhai History Museum. What is the motive behind the killer? Sinan sighed deeply. They have investigated everything about the deceased, but have not found any useful clues. It's really strange. An ancient arrow that no one has seen before, is it still impossible to appear out of thin air? Sneered. The case is mysterious, it's just someone trying to make things mysterious. Boss, aren't you out smoking now? She thought as she stepped into the office. Before she could even recover, she heard Lin Zheng and the team speak, how could you still bring back such a beautiful woman? Lin Zheng is the handsome young man with a black face. Everyone in the office once again turned their gaze to their captain. And behind them, the woman was dressed in a white cotton jacket, a camel-colored woolen long skirt, long hair draped over her shoulders, and had a graceful demeanor. Paired with a stunning face, she really made a group of big men look dumbfounded for a moment. Sinan turned his head in confusion and looked at the person who suddenly appeared behind him. "Beauty, have you gone to the wrong place?" Blinking, the person in front of me is really amazing. Even without makeup, it's hard to take one's gaze away. Everyone suddenly had black lines all over their heads. Is it because they have met a beautiful woman and their intelligence has gone offline? If it's at this level, it's probably not surprising that we can't solve the case, the beautiful woman said lightly. The cool tone made this warm and lively room suddenly flow with a clear stream. Everyone was confused. For the first time, someone was talking to them like this, "Captain Sinan. What kind of person are you?" Sinan's face changed and his tone became a bit unpleasant. The case was already troubling, but someone came to entertain him for no reason. What is this place? What kind of person does he consider Sinan to be? Moreover, this woman looks young, how dare she speak like that at a city police station? The person who came to help you solve the case. The beautiful woman's tone remained the same. "I'm sorry, this beautiful woman. You've gone to the wrong place. Take your time and don't leave." Sinan's patience ran out. He waved his hand and was about to drive people away. Turning around, he wanted to close the door and offer a bowl of closed-door soup. "Boss." Just as I turned around, I heard a strong wind blowing in my ear, and the next second, my brother's screams of surprise echoed. Sinan tilted his body slightly, turned his head, and immediately, a delicate white and small hand appeared in front of him. You have to say, this expert knows if they have it as soon as they make a move. Others may just think that this beautiful woman has some background and want to show off to their leader. However, Sinan's heart was already stirred up. "You, come with me." Sinan squinted his eyes and said in a deep voice as he looked at the still calm and picturesque face of the beautiful woman. "Hey! What's the situation?" The crowd looked at their leader's office door in confusion as it slammed shut. "From the Murong family." Sinan looked at the person standing at the table and approached her, lowering his voice and asking, "Murong Chinga is the best at this whip. Who are you?" The Murong family is one of the prominent clans in the hidden world today. How did it appear at the Binhai police station? "Murong Chinga, it's my brother." The beautiful woman's expression finally changed slightly, and her beautiful eyebrows lightly raised. "My name is Murong Chingli, but this time it's none of his business." After speaking, the person in front of him named Murong Chingli took out a document book from his pocket and handed it to Sinan. "Beautiful police officer, your rank is not higher than mine." After glancing at her identification, Sinan leaned against the table and spread his hand. However, this 25-year-old police academy instructor is quite intimidating, truly a product of the Murong family. "I'm not here to take care of you." Murong Chingli collected his documents and looked at him with a serious expression. "Yuan Boss Hen is my uncle's good friend, and I, as a police officer, have antique appraisal skills, and have case clues. So, I was commissioned to help. Do you have any clues?" Captain C stood up straight, only hearing the most important sentence in this series of words. "CDUI, the progress of the case is not going smoothly. It's because you haven't found the direction yet and the motive of the killer hasn't been determined. Am I right?" Murong Chingli nodded and continued. "Come, sit here, I'll pour you a glass of water, let's talk about it properly." Regarding the clues to the case, Sinan's eagerness was suddenly aroused. "Okay." Murong Chingli pursed his lips and suppressed a smile. This person was not so arrogant either. "Have you discovered the antiques at Yuan Boshan's house?" When Sinan brought the water and sat down, Murong Chingli didn't hesitate. After all, the case was important. "What's more?" Sinan shrugged and shook his head, sighing. "You probably wouldn't have thought that when Yuan Boshan was younger, he was once hired by a national archaeological team as a consultant, which is why he brought about the tragedy of murder. Murong Qingli's tone was slightly heavy. Someone came to the seaside to invite him out of the mountain and explore the tomb. Listen, like a fantasy novel. Sinan rubbed his chin, frowned, and looked at her with a skeptical expression. If you want to go and see it yourself, I can take you there, Murong Qingli said calmly. Sinan suddenly froze. Are you really certain? End of this chapter. Chapter 2002. Clues of Beauty Consultant. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2002 Clues of Beauty Consultant. If it's just catching a group of tomb robbers, isn't it too difficult? Sinan pondered, folding his hands together and leaning on his chin, murmuring softly. It's not too difficult, but you think it's easy. Murong Qingli continued, seeing him looking at him in confusion, so he had to continue explaining. The location of the tomb is already known by the relevant departments, so it is impossible for ordinary tomb robbers/grave robbers to have any more ideas. Are you sure you're Chinga's sister? Why is your temperament so bad? Sinan was stunned and muttered silently. Although I don't have a clue as to who the culprit is at the moment, I can still obtain that ancient arrow under close monitoring from relevant departments. Do you think it could be an ordinary person? Murong Qingli's face stiffened slightly, but he remained calm. Perhaps it's not just an ordinary person. Sinan raised his eyebrows and said with a hint of mockery. Let's go, since you're here to help, go get to know others. Sinan walked out of his office with his people and saw them. The crowd outside quieted down again. Let me introduce the leader sent by our superiors to assist us in solving the case, Murong Qingli, Murong officer. Sinan coughed low and grinned, saying. Hello, I am Murong Qingli, just assisting, not leading. Murong Qingli looked at the stunned crowd and spoke calmly. This Sinan is really I don't know, how could someone like him become a police elite? What puzzled her even more was that her usually gentle brother would become friends with him. Sinan touched his nose, only to find that everyone was still staring at the beautiful woman. So, he raised his voice sharply and let out a big cough. Alright, let's get to know each other again later. Sinan secretly rolled his eyes at his brothers, scratched his head, and said, Now please ask Officer Murong to tell us the clues she has about the case. This person, some people call him Kunbo. Murong Qingli handed a USB drive to the police officer with glasses, who was the person in charge of the network in the city bureau, Su Xiaotian. Seeing her like this, Sinan also raised his eyebrows. She really knows who to give it to. However, Murong Qingli ignored him, and when he saw Su Xiaotian casting the image onto the screen, he spoke up. Kunbo is just a title, no one knows his real name, nor does anyone know if he really looks like this. This statement not only stunned the people present, but also puzzled Sinan. However, we have confirmed that this person is related to a criminal group, and before the tomb was discovered, it was they who were plotting the tomb. Murong Qingli's voice fell. Everyone present widened their eyes and looked at her with disbelief. That. Officer Murong. Sinan scared for a moment, touched his nose, and hesitated to speak. Don't be so outspoken, you can just call me Murong or Qingli. Murong Qingli's expression remained calm. Okay, Murong. Sinan nodded happily, we didn't know anything about the tomb before. They were stunned, it was just an accident. With one sentence, he explained for his brothers, since you know about that criminal group, why did you misbehave them? I just know, Murong Qingli shook his head. We haven't found any information about their middle management, especially the top management. For example, the number of people, things, and how they operate, we still don't know, Murong Qingli finally couldn't help but sigh. This case by the seaside may become a stepping stone, so the case of CDUI and Yuan Boshen is more complex than you think. I understand. Sinan shrugged, so, Murong, what else can you tell us? Everyone, there's something I'm sorry about. Maybe I can tell the team, but he can't tell you about the confidentiality regulations. I hope you understand. Murong Qingli glanced at him and then looked at the others, speaking apologetically. She was indeed a bit sorry, wanting them to investigate, but couldn't provide all the clues. If she were herself, she wouldn't feel comfortable. You don't have to worry about this, Sinan waved his hand. It's not dark yet. How about you and I, with the trace examination, go to Yuan Bashan's house again? Okay, Murong Qingli nodded. Xiao Tian, you, together. Sinan stood up and turned his head to look at the person beside him. Yes. Su Xiaotian quickly responded, glanced at the others, and followed their leader and beautiful woman. Well, the consultant left. I'll go. After they left, Lin Jing couldn't help but take a deep breath. Brothers, this is a big case. It can be said that people have all been sent down from above. The fair-faced young man named Duan Ling also sighed along. However, Brother Chen, how come this person doesn't seem to pass the bureau chief anymore? Shouldn't it be their director who brought the people in when they were sent above? There shouldn't be any identity fraud, and the boss won't be fooled. Chen Zhen shook his head, but haven't you seen the director in these 2 days? All right. Chen Zhen waved his hand as they shook their heads. Let's continue working. Murong, where's your brother? As he drove, Sinan glanced at the people around him and asked casually. He has his business, I'm not sure, Murong Qingli shook his head. If I remember correctly, even if you're a woman, you have to return to your family, right? Sinan rolled his eyes to himself, and the girl's mouth was quite tight. How many things do you not know about the family? Murong Qingli turned his head to look at him in silence. Their family is not just a small family, are they pretending to be with her? Don't tell me, you don't know, I was kicked out of the house by my old man. Sinan grinned at her, not feeling embarrassed at all. So what if you know? Murong Qingli turned her head and looked out the window, speaking inexplicably. Sinan raised his eyebrows and looked at her, understanding that she didn't want to say anything more. So, he chuckled and brought the topic back to the case. Just now in the office, some things were really difficult to say. Turning into a residential area, Sinan's voice lowered a bit. I don't think your uncle may know about your visit this time, because your mission here is very dangerous. I won't implicate anyone from the police station, including you. Upon hearing this, Murong Qingli's face changed noticeably for the first time. Not involving them, yes. Sinan nodded, parked the car in front of a building, and then turned his head to look at her with a solemn expression. You can easily involve yourself. Murong Qingli's face suddenly stiffened. When this person spoke, it's really, I got off the car, with you this time, maybe we can get some more rewards. Sinan saw her staring at him blankly, tilted her head, and gestured for her to get off the car. Also, Bin Hai will be cold next time. Next time you show up, don't wear a skirt. You don't need to say it. Murong Qingli took a deep breath and really wanted to give him a pair of white eyes. End of this chapter. Chapter 3003. Re-survey of the site. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3003 Site Reconnaissance. Chen Nua, take Xiao Hu, Xiao Wang, and Xiao Tian to wait at the door first. Arriving at the scene, Yuan Bashan's house, Sinan looked inside and then at the people around him. He asked Chen Nua for 2 sets of shoe covers and gloves, and gave Murong Qingli a set. Looking up and at the other people who were already dressed, he explained. Chen Nua is the head of the Department of Trace Examination, and Hu Wan and Wang Yang are his 2 assistants and apprentices. I understand. Chen Nua responded. Sinan turned around and nodded at the people around him, then took the first step in. Yuan Bashan's house has 3 bedrooms and 2 living rooms, and the scene is in his study. However, all the places here have been surveyed, and his family has also moved to another place. Sitting in the living room, Sinan spoke. According to Yuan Bashan's wife, they were the only 2 of them who lived regularly at home. That night, after finishing dinner, Yuan Boshen went into the study and instructed not to disturb him. Then, Yuan Boshen's wife tidied up and rested. The next morning, she found out that Yuan Boshen had not returned to the bedroom all night and had been killed in the study. Sinan simply paraphrased Yuan Boshen's words and pointed her to the positions of each room. Yuan Boshen often works all night without rest. Murong Qingli nodded and asked as he walked towards the direction of the study. I asked her, it's true, Sinan nodded. Based on the situation at the scene and the location of Yuan Boshen, I speculated that someone had entered the study, stood at the desk, and shot an arrow at Yuan Boshen across this desk. Sinan sighed and leaned against the door, his face slightly cold as he continued. However, Yuan Boshen's wife said she didn't hear anyone coming to the house. We checked the surveillance cameras everywhere and didn't find anything. Spreading his hands, Sinan looked at the person standing at the table with some frustration. At your location, the person picking up the tracks did not find any footprints, nor did they find any traces of outsiders. Seeing her turn to look at herself, Sinan scratched his head and cursed softly. I've really seen a ghost. Do you know someone can do it? Murong Qingli spoke calmly and turned towards the window beside her. Qingli beauty, there are traces, I found them, but they are not enough to support the evidence. Sinan followed her over. And, one thing, I've been wondering why Yuan Boshen didn't shout. If it's really the criminal group you're talking about, then the motive for the murder is because Yuan Boshen didn't explore their graves. Why did he send such a skilled person? Have you taken anything with you here? Murong Qingli looked at the traces on the window and turned to look at his puzzled expression, asking. No, Sinan shook his head. I didn't let him bring his things back to the police station casually. Someone was sent outside to strictly guard them. Murong Qingli responded and turned to look at the two huge bookshelves. Is there a problem with this? Seeing her finish checking one bookshelf, she turned to another and opened a box in the same position as the previous bookshelf. Suddenly, her face changed. Sinan quickly approached her and asked in a low voice. Originally, he still knew this. Murong Qingli slowly looked at him, looking really surprised. Speak clearly. Sinan was stunned for a moment, her expression was too indicative. These two bookshelves, whether they are bookshelves or the things placed, are almost symmetrical. Did you notice them? Murong Qingli breathed a sigh of relief and asked. Nature. Sinan nodded, although I don't fully understand their profession, I have checked all these things, including tools, which should be necessary for his work. Of course, I have also asked someone about them. Sinan raised his eyebrows, he has always been very rigorous in his work. Murong Qingli nodded, well, probably there aren't many people we can meet now. But you can recognize them, they are different. Sinan listened to her somewhat emotional words and understood it in his heart. There seems to be a problem with the tools in this box. That set is what he needs in his normal work. Murong Qingli pointed to the box on the bookshelf behind them and said. This set is used for counterfeiting, Murong Qingli said in a low tone. It is an ancient method of counterfeiting, and even the people in aristocratic families who know this method are very few. It seems that some people don't just want him to explore the tomb. Sinan sneered. However, since he is so secretive, is there a possibility of suicide? If he really doesn't want to be used by some people. In an instant, Sinan pondered a lot and looked up at the person in front of him with sharp eyes. If he refuses to be used even if he dies, why not ask for help? Murong Qingli paused and shook his head. Even if it's useless to report to the police, there will still be people he knows who are willing to help. Your uncle. Sinan tilted his head, did you learn all this knowledge from your uncle? Now it seems that the criminal group may not only be stealing tombs, stealing cultural relics, but also. Murong Qingli glanced at him and his tone became even deeper. Still making and selling fake products. Sinan shrugged when she saw it and smiled. It seems like a very organized group. Officer Murong, what should we do now? Seeing her eyes complexly colored, he glanced at himself again. Sinan took a deep breath and asked for advice as if he were pretending. Are you teasing me? That's interesting. Murong Qingli finally couldn't help but turn his head and glare at him. Where is there? Don't mistreat me. Sinan raised his hands and looked innocent. Then I'll explain it to them and we'll leave. Rogue. Murong Qingli watched as he walked to the door to call for someone, raised his hand to stroke his forehead, and secretly let out a low sigh. Xiao Tian, send more people here. We must keep an eye on them. No mosquito can approach until orders are issued, Sinan said solemnly as he pulled over Su Xiaotian. Don't worry, boss, I'll transfer another surveillance person, Su Xiaotian nodded and responded. Chen Noa, these 2 boxes are important evidence. No mistake can be made. In a moment, you can take them back to the police station and leave them in my office. Turning to look at Chen Noa, Sinan pulled him to the bookshelf and said more cautiously. No problem, Chen Noa nodded. Team leader, what else do we need to do? Although puzzled, Chen Noa was clever not to immediately ask a question. You and Chen Zhen are watching in the office, waiting for me to go back before leaving. Sinan thought for a moment and patted his shoulder. Okay. Chen Noa became more aware of the problem and nodded again. Murong, let's go. Sinan saw that they had all taken orders, and then he called on the newly appointed beauty consultant to leave. Do you think the City Expo has made any discoveries? Murong Qingli sat in the passenger seat again and looked at the already dark sky before suddenly asking. How about we guess? Sinan smiled upon hearing this. Murong Qing's younger sister is indeed not just beautiful, her mind is also really good. CDUI, have you always been so familiar? Murong Qingli was really not used to this way of speaking to him. Of course we are familiar with each other, said Sinan with a shrug and a grin. I have always been very clear about distinguishing between the enemy and ourselves. Murong Qingli didn't want to take his words anymore and turned his gaze to the outside of the window, hoping that the decision to cooperate with this person was not wrong. End of this chapter. Chapter 4004. Progress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4004 Progress. After Yuan Bashan's death, his office was also sealed off, just for you to take a look. Presenting their documents, Sinan and Murong Qingli followed the gatekeeper of Sherbua towards Yuan Bashan's former office. Is there a place here to restore and maintain cultural relics? Murong Qingli nodded and asked back. Shouldn't there be? Sinan was stunned for a moment, because they hadn't found any clues pointing to this before, so they didn't ask. He said as his gaze shifted to the gatekeeper who was leading the way next to him. Officer, this kind of place naturally exists. The gatekeeper nodded quickly upon seeing the situation, that Yuan consultant had guided the staff there before his death. Do you also know this? Sinan saw his gaze flickering and didn't dare to look at Murong Qingli. He raised his eyebrows and chuckled inwardly. Officer, being a gatekeeper here has different responsibilities, the gatekeeper said proudly. That's right. Sinan shrugged, then take us over later. Okay, the gatekeeper responded with cooperation. Turn on the light in Yuan Bashan's former office, and Sinan followed behind Murong Qingli, walking in front and back. This is. Sinan looked at her carefully inspecting every part, and his heart gradually recognized her abilities. When he saw her hand a notebook to him. We arrived in a timely manner, Murong Qingli spoke in a low tone, while opening his notebook. Look at this information, as well as these few pictures, someone gave him the information. The information about that tomb. Sinan's eyes darkened, so now, it's uncertain whether he's innocent or not. He wasn't invited, so he shouldn't have had this information. Murong Qingli sighed and put away his notebook. Go take a look elsewhere. Okay, Sinan nodded, his expression also beginning to solemn. It was already past 7 p.m. when I left the city museum. Sinan got into the car and looked at the person next to him who was wearing his seatbelt. First, go back to the police station. Later, treat you to dinner and let's take it as a welcome. Information leakage, I'm afraid. Murong Qingli shook his head, took out his phone, and quickly sent a message. Sinan did not turn his head or ask, as she had said before, if she could tell him, she should not hide it. Do you have a place to live by the seaside? After parking the car in the police station courtyard, Sinan turned around and asked. Yes. Murong Qingli glanced at him and turned to get off the car. Beautiful woman, cold and aloof. Sinan shrugged and turned to get off the car. It's been a whole afternoon now, and I didn't give a smile, really. Looking back, he must kiss her brother, and Murong Qingga will chatter on and on. The information brought by Officer Murong now confirms that Yuan Boss Hen is indeed involved. Seeing everyone still waiting for them, Sinan called out the people from his office and carefully packed their things. I shared my notebook and related information with everyone again. Tonight, let's do this for now. Let's go eat together later and greet Officer Murong. Tomorrow, we'll be busy. Thank you all, please take good care of us in the future. Murong Qingli couldn't help but smile at everyone as she couldn't resist. Seeing this, Sinan couldn't help but feel angry in his heart. He would smile at others and at him this beautiful woman's smile was truly deadly. Sinan touched his nose, coughed twice, and turned around to greet everyone to leave work. A lively dinner failed to bring down the cold and aloof beauty from the altar. Sinan looked at the expressions of his brothers frowning and making eyes, and his head was also covered in black lines. Let's all go back and rest. I'll see Officer Murong off. Okay. Officer Murong, see you tomorrow. The crowd playfully bid them farewell. Report the address, leader. Sinan started the car and spoke in a relaxed tone. Building B in Jinghe Community, 1202. Murong Qingli calmly reported his address. Sinan was taken aback for a moment, then turned his head to look at her, only to see that she looked at the night view outside the car and ignored him. He lives in 1201, okay. This one, what about teasing him? Are you so surprised? Murong Qingli turned his head silently to look at the person who had been staring at him. The leader arranged it, probably to save time. Not surprised. Sinan blinked and turned around with a grin, starting the car. It's good to live nearby, it's convenient to take care of. When your brother finds out, he says I didn't take good care of his sister. Murong Qingli once again felt that he didn't want to talk to him. He takes care of people. Look at the captain of his company like this, being taken care of by someone is pretty good. The two of them returned to their residence all the way and got out of the elevator. However, Sinan suddenly sighed and stopped to look at the person walking towards the opposite door of his house. Murong, to be honest, do you have any ideas on how to investigate the case next? CDUI, in fact, although there are many things that colleagues at the police station can do, I am not sure if they can find clues that can serve as knocking bricks. Murong Qingli turned to look at him. The line of Yuan Boss Hen is still useful or not? We need to check to find out, isn't it? Rest well, I'll call you tomorrow morning. Sinan nodded and turned to enter his own door. Murong Qingli looked at his back and slowly shifted his gaze towards the elevator entrance. After standing for a while, he walked into this temporary residence. The suitcase was still in the living room, and after looking around, Murong Qingli walked to the side of the suitcase, looked down, and finally walked to the window. After checking everything around, Murong Qingli began packing his luggage and preparing to wash and rest. Across from him, Sinan returned to his residence but lay directly on the sofa, closed his eyes, pondered for a moment before opening his eyes and staring at the ceiling. Stinky girl. You're fooling ghosts. Sitting up, Sinan chuckled softly. As the successor of the next Murong family, Murong Chinga will not know what his sister is doing. It seems that there is a reason why Murong Qingli is so capable. Murong Qingli. As he recited the name, a hint of strangeness flashed through Sinan's eyes. Turning his thoughts back to the case, Sinan narrowed his eyes. Since Yuan Boshen has received the relevant information, it means that someone must have come into contact with him. However, they had also checked the recent whereabouts of Yuan Boshen before and did not find any abnormal people or things. Is it? Sinan's eyes darkened as he rapidly pondered various possibilities in his mind. After a while, Sinan took a long breath and got up to enter the bedroom. Downstairs, an inconspicuous black sedan slowly drove away and disappeared into the night. And as the night deepened, some places became even busier. Tomorrow morning, come over for breakfast. After taking a shower, Sinan wandered back to bed and took his phone, only to find that an unfamiliar number had sent a message. Looking at the information content, Sinan smiled and opened WeChat. Can you still cook? Qingli. Just use your name as your WeChat name. Sinan looked at his phone screen, raised his eyebrows, and let out a wicked smile. Murong Qingli heard her phone ring, took it, clicked through, and soon 4 words appeared on the screen, along with a big smiling face. Looking at the words above, Murong Qingli put down her phone and turned to sleep. End of this chapter. Chapter 5005. Morning Shock Case. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5005 Early Morning Shock Case. I'll go. Sinan was startled by a sudden ringing of the bell. He scratched his head and woke up from his sleep. Xiaotian, what case do you have? This ringtone was specially designed by him to be used in emergency situations at night, as he had told Su Xiaotian. Therefore, at this moment, Sinan was not completely awake, and even with his eyes closed, he knew who it was. Boss, Yuan Boshen's wife and son's family have been killed by an explosion. Su Xiaotian's angry voice immediately sounded. What? Sinan suddenly became alert and clear-headed. After the death of Yuan Boshen, his home was sealed off as a scene, and his wife moved to his son's house for his convenience in taking care of him. Exploded to death. Sinan opened his eyes and stared at the dark blanket on the bed, murmuring softly in a calm tone. His son lives in Chunyin Garden, and what about the residents around him? If it is really bombed, it may affect many people. Thinking about it, Sinan suddenly lifted the bed and it was about to shake. Boss, they weren't bombed at home. Su Xiaotian's voice rang out again urgently. It's already 6 o'clock now. They drove away from home and the car exploded. Leaving home so early. Sinan hesitated for a moment, his mind full of doubts. Forget it, where is the scene? Send me the address, and I will go directly. You can contact other people. I have already contacted you, I will send you the address immediately. Su Xiaotian responded and hung up the phone. Sinan let out a long sigh, threw down his phone, and went into the restroom. After brushing his teeth, washing his face, and looking up, Sinan suddenly remembered that a new colleague had just moved into his opposite door. Quickly wiping his face, Sinan ran back to the bedroom, grabbed his phone, and sent a message to the new neighbor across the door. 5 minutes before and after, Sinan rushed out of his house and was about to knock on the opposite door when he looked up and saw people standing in the hallway. You're fast enough. Sinan looked at the person in front of him. Let's go, talk as we go. CDUI. Sitting in the car, Sinan was about to start the car when suddenly the person sitting in the passenger seat spoke up. You already have some doubts, don't you? What do you mean? Sinan met her gaze and after a while, he smiled and turned to start the car. There are some things that you want to talk about. Let's go to the scene and see the situation now. Sinan's tone was slightly subdued, with his usual casualness. It seems that you do have doubts, no wonder my brother thinks so highly of you. Murong Qingli suddenly smiled with some relief. I finally understand why the Murong family has such a dark side, and my own brother is not afraid of this one anymore. Your brother has a keen eye, someone replied humbly. This time, Murong Qingli no longer felt speechless, but couldn't help but laugh. Boss, the scene is very miserable. Arriving at the scene, as soon as he got off the car, Su Xiaotian ran over. What did colleagues from the relevant department say? Sinan glanced at some of the people who were conducting surveys and asked in a deep voice. It's confirmed that it was human-made and a small bomb was placed. Su Xiaotian's face was very unpleasant. It's really too reckless. If you want the car to explode, you don't necessarily have to use explosives/bombs. Isn't it better for the killer to let people know that it's because of people? Sinan squinted his eyes and murmured in confusion. What do people from the legal and medical department say? Sinan saw that the same person who got off the car had already walked to the front of the car. Seeing Su Xiaotian looking at her with some surprise, he continued to ask. Director Han of the forensic department personally brought someone here, but after looking at the scene and not saying anything, he restrained the body and returned to the bureau. Su Xiaotian spread out his hand. Let's go over and take a look, Sinan nodded. The head of the legal and medical department, Han Mu, is usually not the first person to speak up on such an extraordinary case. Boss, it seems that Chen Nua and his team have noticed. Chen Zhen said in a low voice after greeting them as they came over. I remember arranging for police officers to keep an eye on them downstairs while they were traveling. Why didn't they report? I asked, but I didn't find them traveling. Chen Zhen sighed. Yuan Qingyi, the son of Yuan Boss Hen, has been parked in front of the building. They have been keeping an eye on it, but Yuan Qingyi's wife Yang Jing's car is in the underground garage, that's it. Sinan listened to his words, his gaze fixed on the already unsightly car, his eyes darkened. Murong, who do you think they are evading? The police or? Sinan turned his head to look at the person beside him. It's not the police. Murong Qingli turned to look at him, his tone low but affirmative. I guess so. Sinan raised his eyebrows and snorted softly. Turn around, it's time for someone to investigate everyone in the Yuan family. Is your brother at the seaside? After watching the scene for a while, Sinan pulled Murong Qingli's arm and walked to the back of the car, avoiding the others and asked in a low voice. Why don't you ask him? Murong Qingli looked at him calmly. How do you know I didn't ask? Sinan shrugged. You said yesterday that your uncle and Yuan Boss Hen were friends. Which uncle? Murong Anshu. After a pause, Murong Qingli said a name. Is there such a person in your family? Sinan thought for a moment and leaned against the car, turning his head to look at the person with a calm expression. Yes. This time, after a while, Murong Qingli turned to the beginning and replied with a slightly ambiguous tone. Is there anything else to say? Seeing her like this, Sinan could only sigh inwardly. That's why he hates aristocratic families, and it's also why he left home. All my relevant knowledge was taught by him, not learned at school. Murong Qingli secretly eased his mind. The Murong family actually has hidden business, but it has been gradually shrinking in recent years, Murong Qingli said slowly as she looked back at a group of easy-going but deep-eyed people. My brother and my father have discussed that if he can succeed, he will clear all those, and from now on, the Murong family will only do legitimate business. It's really your brother's style. Sinan nodded. However, in this way, I'm afraid it has harmed the interests of many people, right? Listening to his slightly mocking words, Murong Qingli did not answer. What she was thinking was the new case before her. Previously, the reason why she stepped out of the door faster than Sinan was because her source of information was not Sinan, which also made her suspect that there might be people from the Murong family involved in an incident with the family of Yuan Boss Hen. You got involved because of that criminal group, with the Murong family involved. Sinan saw her expression becoming colder and looked at the busy people over there, then lowered his voice again. Are you sure? Is it related to your uncle? I'm not sure, Murong Qingli shook his head. But I suspect that my brother and I have been secretly investigating for a while, but... This beautiful woman bit her lips lightly, with a clear and sorrowful expression on her eyebrows, which is really unbearable. Either he's hiding too well, or he's just some people's puppet. Sinan turned his gaze and coughed softly. Your brother is very certain of your ability, and I've seen it too. Murong, the case is difficult and easy, but there are no cases that cannot be investigated clearly. It can only be a matter of ability that cannot be investigated clearly. So, let's work hard together. After finishing, he smiled at her and turned to walk towards the crowd who were looking at them. End of this chapter. Chapter 6006. Floating to the surface. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6006 Floating to the surface. Boss, these are the relevant reports. In the evening, Su Xiaotian saw the person entering the office and quickly grabbed the folder on the table, got up, and walked over. In the morning, everyone returned to the office for a meeting and was arranged to leave. Even their leader, Sinan, and the beautiful consultant were busy outside. Su Xiaotian stayed alone in the office with a few police officers responsible for searching for relevant information that could be found online. The relevant departments and the forensic department were also quite quick, and all the reports that could be produced were sent over. Sinan gestured for the people who came in together to sit down first, flipping through the folder and quickly looking at it. Upon seeing this, Su Xiaotian quickly invited someone to sit down and poured out 2 cups of hot water. After reading the report issued by the relevant department regarding the on-site explosion/bomb, Sinan handed it to Murong Qingli and continued to evaluate some of the results given by the medical department. People are indeed the wives and sons of Yuan Boss Hen, as well as his daughter. In law. Sinan sat crookedly at the corner of the table, turning his head to look at the person who was somewhat distracted by the report. However, it's a bit surprising that their house is so clean. Sinan squinted his eyes and pondered. Bombing, commonly used by tomb robbers in recent years, is small and delicate. Murong Qingli closed the folder and looked up. Although Murong Qingli remained calm, his face still had some discomfort. Some members of the Murong family have actually provided equipment for those people, so to some extent, they are also accomplices. Murong, don't you think this is not quite right? Sinan glanced at her expression, shook his head, and became even more suspicious. These clues seem directional to you, don't they? Sinan saw her looking at him with some confusion, so he breathed a sigh of relief and continued. But isn't this directionality too obvious? Can't they really do it more discreetly? This morning, you had this suspicion at the scene. Murong Qingli thought of his words, then slowly frowned and spoke in a calm tone. What do you mean? Suddenly, Murong Qingli stood up and looked at him again with some surprise. I don't mean much, Sinan shook his head again. I'm just raising doubts. Maybe we'll have to wait for news from Chen Zhen and his team. Sinan actually understood a bit. Today, they had time to find out something. Maybe someone was helping in the dark. Xiao Tian, what have you gained from leading someone to check the surveillance footage and the online information of Yuan Qingyi's family? Sinan turned to look at the person sitting behind the computer and asked. Boss, I was about to tell you. Su Xiaotian nodded. The surveillance footage of the underground parking lot was destroyed, and no abnormalities were found in the communication records of the 3 deceased. However, according to Yuan Qingyi's wife's consumption records, their income was somewhat abnormal. In addition, the surveillance of the underground parking lot was destroyed, but a surveillance camera not far from the exit captured a car that did not belong to this community entering the underground parking lot. Su Xiaotian handed over a photo. What a pity. Sinan looked down, but Su Xiaotian sighed again, shook his head, and said somewhat dejectedly, Boss, this car is a reported lost car. The owner reported the case 2 days ago and has already gone to find out with his brother. Xiao Tian, let's call and order dinner. The others should be back soon, too. Sinan handed the photo back and explained. After speaking, he stood up and greeted Murong Qingli, who was contemplating, into his office. I want to see your brother once, said Sinan directly. Why don't you contact him yourself? Murong Qingli hesitated for a moment, blinked, and looked at him puzzled. What are you doing here? Sinan looked at her and raised his eyebrows, chuckling lightly. If I were to contact her directly, wouldn't it be too conspicuous? Isn't your brother about to be exposed directly? It's not as exaggerated as you said. Murong Qingli was a little speechless. Did you think of today's event? Is it your brother who secretly helped out to find out so much? Sinan shrugged and glanced at her upright sitting posture. What a beautiful lady from a wealthy family. Some of you Murong family members are going to be attacked back and forth. Sinan lazily leaned against the table, with a hint of mockery in his tone. Speaking of which, have you ever come into contact with Yuan Boshen before? I'm thinking, how long has he been involved in those things? He is knowledgeable, I have only seen him once. His speech and behavior are gentle and elegant, and on the surface, he looks like my uncle. Murong Qingli crossed his fingers and placed them on his knee, slowly speaking. According to what we have learned from the people at the City Museum, it is indeed true. Sinan nodded. Can we now figure out 2 lines? One is for your Murong family to provide some things, and then be responsible for selling some things. On the side of Yuan Boshen, the identification and falsification may also be related to the Murong family. Now, the most important link is still missing, which is the criminal group you mentioned, said Sinan, staring at Murong Qingli, waiting for her to speak. Your analysis is similar. Murong Qingli looked at him for 2 seconds and sighed. So, the entire line can be seen now, but we still have a lot of things to be sure about. Ha! Sinan sneered. Before, they were so secretive. What went wrong this time? How could they be so caught and killed like this? Murong, you said you could take me to see that tomb. What's so special about that tomb? How could they not give up in such a situation? I need to apply for information about that tomb before I can tell you. Murong Qingli shook his head. Before Murong Qingli could finish speaking, there was a knock on the door. In. Sinan spoke loudly. Boss, Officer Murong, Chen and the others are back and dinner is here. Su Xiaotian leaned in and looked at the 2 people in the room, saying. I understand. Sinan stood up straight and called out, Murong, let's go and listen to what they found. Boss, I haven't gained much. Chen Zhen sighed heavily as everyone held cups of hot water and felt cold all over. Don't worry, take a sip of water, keep it warm. Sinan opened several boxes of rice, picked 2 boxes and handed them to Murong Qingli. Then, he took 2 boxes himself, and let Su Xiaotian share the rest. After checking for a whole day, we only found one thing. Yuan Qingyi often goes to an antique shop in the old city area. Chen Zhen took a deep breath, picked up his chopsticks, stopped there, and continued. Although Yuan Boshen works at the Market Expo, Yuan Qingyi works in finance. We have inquired with the company he works for. There shouldn't be anything unusual about that company, but a colleague in the same department as Yuan Qingyi said that in the past few months, Yuan Qingyi seems to want to resign, saying that he is interested in antiques and wants to learn from his father. Chen Zhen said this, looking at his own boss who is bowing down to eat with a puzzled expression. Boss, looking at it this way, do Yuan Boshen and his son both? Lin Zheng and Duan Ling went to keep an eye on that antique shop, along with the other 2 brothers, pay attention to safety. Sinan quickly finished his meal and began arranging the task. Xiaotian and brother Chen are working hard. They are on duty tonight and are waiting for other results on site. Please notify me immediately if you need me to know. Yes. Although everyone was puzzled, they also responded. End of this chapter. Chapter 7007. Meeting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7007 Meeting. Team Leader, come to my place for a cup of coffee. Upon returning to his residence and stepping out of the elevator, Murong Qingli looked at the people around him and whispered. I didn't finish breakfast, do you still have coffee to drink? Sinan smiled, next time, I'll treat you instead. In fact, Sinan didn't plan to go back to his residence, just waiting for her to speak up. Murong Qingli reached out and opened the door, and suddenly, a fragrant aroma of rice came out. Should I regret not having a brother? Sinan put on Murong Qingli's slippers in front of her and grinned at her. In that lifetime, you can only regret it. Murong Qingli glared at him and turned around to leave. Be careful, my sister can't help but tease. A hearty laugh came, and a handsome man brought 2 dishes on the dining table. I've learned. Sinan walked over quickly and hugged the man with a smile. Chinga, long time no see. It's going to be a year. The man was Murong Qingli's brother, Murong Chinga. Here, I've made some food, let's eat more. He pulled out his chair and asked Sinan to sit down. Murong Chinga smiled and patted his shoulder before turning his head to look in the direction of the bedroom over there. Li, I made soup for you. Drink some before you rest. Got it. The voice sounded, and after a while, Murong Qingli walked out in a white long dress. Hey! Chinga, come to my place and talk about the main business later. Sinan looked at the people approaching and was stunned for a moment before touching his nose and turning his head to look at the person behind him. Okay. Murong Qinga lowered her head and blinked at him, smiling inexplicably. She responded and turned back into the kitchen. By the way, what big thing happened in your family this year? Looking at the person sitting across from him, Sinan lay down on the table, lowered his voice, and asked, your brother's anger has increased a lot. Do you still believe this? Murong Qingli looked up at him and then reached out to pick up the kettle on the table, took the cups, and poured water one by one. It's not a matter of faith, it's obvious. Sinan pouted and looked at the food in front of him. However, the food looks delicious. Well, I just don't know the taste. If you taste it, you'll know. Murong Qinga walked out again, holding a large bowl of soup in his hand. It's getting late, it's a bit light. If you want to eat, make it again when you have the chance. Okay, said Sinan with a smile. Murong Qingli drank a bowl of soup and turned around to enter the study, ignoring the 2 big men. Murong Qinga and Sinan finished their meal, tidied up briefly, and then followed Sinan back to the opposite door. Sinan, how is my sister? Sinan didn't expect that Murong Qinga would sit down on his sofa and ask his fairy sister the first thing he said. What do you mean? Sinan hesitated for a moment and looked at the person in front of him with some confusion. Beautiful, but too cold and aloof. However, her ability is good. Bring her to Binhai to solve the case with me. Did your Murong family really encounter big trouble this time? Sinan, if a big family inherits to a certain extent, you know what the outcome will be. Murong Qinga sighed. Sinan looked at him with a different temperament than before. The clean and carefree recklessness of a year ago was almost impossible to find. Upon hearing his words again, I couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Someone wants to drag the Murong family into an irreversible situation. Sinan, I can't go back to the old Murong Qinga anymore. It seems that the situation is even more serious than what your sister said. Sinan frowned lightly, speak up. Sinan, there's something I need to ask you first. Murong Qinga shook his head, his tone conveying a hint of sincerity. Don't say that. Sinan looked at him with a black line all over his head. There's nothing we can ask for between us. Sinan, Lily hasn't returned home for a year. My father and I tried our best to arrange various tasks for her, but we didn't want her to go back. Murong Qinga shook her head again. Is there anyone in the Murong family who wants to have her cut first? Sinan's eyes darkened. Finding you is indeed right, Murong Chinga nodded. A year ago, someone tried to get Li and Li to get married. My father told me immediately, Sinan, you know, no matter what the situation is, Li and Li must be willing. We cannot sacrifice Li and Li's lifelong happiness. However, the person who proposed this matter made it clear that they were ill-intentioned and wanted to use Li to contain me and my father, as well as to exploit Li's identity. My father and I combined and asked Li not to go home for now. I will go back and assist my father in investigating what they really want to do. Who would have thought? Looking at the Sai with a cold expression on his face, Sinan's eyes became even darker. Chinga, let's start from scratch, said Sinan in a deep voice. After saying this, the two of them talked for half a night. Murong Chinga held a cup and looked at the person with a contemplative expression. Chinga, some of the people involved here may have extraordinary identities, otherwise some information wouldn't be so fast and detailed, said Sinan in a deep voice, gritting his teeth. I have some information here that you can use. When you come back, I will give it to you. Additionally, I will stay at Binhai for some time because I believe this is their last stop. Murong Chinga nodded and stood up. I'll leave first, you rest, Li will ask you to take care of me. You should also pay attention to safety in the dark, said Sinan as he stood up to see him off. My skills, you know. Murong Chinga smiled and left. Watching Murong Chinga enter the elevator, Sinan leaned against the door and looked at the opposite door. You should all know that, right? After a while, Sinan shook his head and chuckled, murmured, turned around and closed the door, ready to take a nap. My brother left. Just as he returned to the bedroom, his phone rang. Sinan looked at the message and raised his eyebrows. Just left, why don't you sleep? You still have some busy time tomorrow. After waiting for a while, Sinan looked up at his phone, which was still motionless, and sighed helplessly. Then, he got up and went into the restroom. I said, it hasn't been a day since it improved, and it's been as cold as the sky again. The next morning, Sinan walked out and leaned against the wall, watching the person across from him walk out of the house. What does that mean? Murong Chingli handed him the bag in his hand, looking at him with some confusion. Last night, I waited for your reply for a while. Sinan was speechless and lowered his head to open the bag. Breakfast. Thank you very much. For so many years, besides my own mother cooking breakfast, this is the first one. Nanan followed behind Murong Chingli happily, went downstairs, and never said he was cold anymore. Boss, there's a situation. As he got into the car, Sinan's phone rang, it was Lin Zheng. Say it. Sinan glanced at the person next to him, his expression furrowed, and he opened his hand. This antique shop called Boya Xian entered a batch of items at 1 a.m., and now someone came to take them away. The items were all wrapped in wooden boxes, Lin Zheng reported with a slightly heavy tone. It should be an antique, Murong Chingli nodded and whispered as he looked at him. Lin Zheng, keep watching. Sinan thought for a moment and explained, pay attention to safety. After hanging up the phone, Sinan called Su Xiaotian. Xiaotian, immediately locate a car departing from that antique shop. Received. Su Xiaotian responded decisively. Walking. Sinan placed his phone on the front bracket and drove out of the community. End of this chapter. Chapter 8008. Personal Tracking. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8008 Personal Tracking. Half an hour later, Sinan parked his car on the road outside a residential area. Sinan was eating breakfast prepared by Murong Chingli and looked at the row of bungalows across the road, one of which was a dilapidated courtyard. Is this a logistics company? Murong Chingli spoke with some confusion. Sinan replied as he ate his delicious breakfast. At this moment it was already dawn and there were more cars on the road. They were parked here, which was not very noticeable. Is that antique shop just a transfer station? Murong Qingli frowned lightly. Will this be the same here? It should be more than just a transfer station, said Sinan after finishing his meal. He packed the utensils and placed them in the back seat, then turned his head to look at the busy person in the yard. Do you think they would put in so much effort if it wasn't necessary? Do you mean, where are they exchanging goods? Murong Qingli was quick to understand. Since they have the issue of counterfeiting, I think those people are not just circulating genuine products, Sinan nodded. By the way, your brother should send some information to you later. Remember to tell me. Murong Qingli nodded. Why haven't they come out? Murong Qingli stared for an hour, unable to see anyone in that courtyard, and asked in confusion. Maybe it's waiting for time, Sinan pondered and finished speaking. He took out his phone and waited for a while before finally dialing the phone. Brother Chen, bring a few people to Hengrui Street. Yes. Over there, Chenjin responded and hung up the phone. Are you not continuing to follow? Murong Qingli turned his head to look at him. Let's go back to the bureau and see if there's any more information from the trace examination and forensic examination, Sinan nodded. We also need to find out where the car that was delivered to the antique store last night came from. Murong, we don't have enough manpower. With a low sigh, Sinan scratched his head. It's against the rules to ask Murong Qingga for help. Although he may still investigate without seeking Murong Qingga, that's another matter. Why don't we apply for 2 people from above? Murong Qingli remained silent for a while before slowly saying. Do you think it's in time? Sinan leaned his hand against his face and didn't look back at her. CDUIU. Murong Qingli hesitated even more in his tone, do you believe me? Do you think I don't believe you? Sinan chuckled and turned to look at her troubled expression. Can I arrange for 2 people to come over through the normal procedure? Murong Qingli looked at the person in front of her and bit her lip, unsure. Why hasn't the night been too long? This change shouldn't be too big, Sinan looked at her with a gentle expression. Murong, don't show such an unconfident expression. It's not like you. Look at the arrangement, but please do it as soon as possible. You don't know what I look like. Murong Qingli looked at him calmly and thought to himself. When we return to the police station, the person I arranged should also be here. Murong Qingli turned his head, looked ahead, and whispered. It seems that you are also prepared to come to Binhai. Looking at her gentle profile, Sinan's eyes lit up with a smile. So, Officer Murong, do you have any other arrangements? Sinan, can you stop joking with me? Murong Qingli's face stiffened slightly, and his tone was also a bit unpleasant. It's related to work, I never joke. Sinan glanced at the rearview mirror and saw the car slowly stopping behind him, which was Chen Zhen and the others. I won't joke about my own or anyone's life. After speaking, Sinan started the car and raised his hand to call Chen Zhen again. Brother Chen, please pay attention to safety and report any movements at any time. Got it, boss. Chen Zhen's voice came solemnly. Sinan hung up the phone and went all the way back to the police station. Murong Xia, Murong Qiu. Sure enough, there were already 2 people waiting for them in the office, and there were also 2 young people who looked very similar. I used to study at a police academy, and my father arranged for them, so they also had positions. This time, coming to Binhai is also a normal appointment. Are they obedient to you now? Sinan looked at the 2 young men, who were indeed quite good. They were also elites. Hello, I'm Sinan, the captain of the Criminal Investigation Bureau of Binhai City. Before she could answer, Sinan introduced himself to the 2 of them. Hello, Captain. The 2 of them bowed and then turned their gaze to Murong Qingli. You guys take a break here first, Murong and I will go and collect some information. We'll talk about it when we come back, said Sinan, and then walked out step by step. From now on, everything will be arranged by the team to ensure the smooth progress of the task. Murong Qingli nodded to the two before taking steps to follow them. Are they just bodyguards? On the way to the forensic department, Sinan suddenly spoke up. They're just surnamed Murong, Murong Qingli whispered back, you know. Murong, I haven't been home for a year, so I feel very uncomfortable, right? Stopped and Sinan turned to look at her. Murong Qingli looked at him with some surprise, opened his mouth, but was somewhat unable to express himself. Do you know why your father and brother don't let you go back? Sinan looked at her steep, pale pretty face with deep eyes. She sighed inwardly. She must have guessed before, right? Sinan, we dragged you into the murky waters of the Murong family without your consent. Aren't you angry? Murong Qingli tried to suppress his panic and asked calmly. Where did you see that I was angry? Sinan couldn't help but laugh and cry. Punishing traitors and eliminating evil is my duty, and besides, my friendship with your brother is not just a matter of words. It seems that you're not overthinking it, but rather overthinking it a bit. With a sigh, Sinan turned around and continued walking forward. After taking 2 steps, he turned back and reached out, ignoring her astonishment as he grabbed her hand. Qingli, there's no need to hide your unease with high coldness in the future. Sinan looked ahead and tightly held her hand, refusing to let her break free. Like your brother, I won't let anyone bully you. I clearly felt the slightly cold little hand in my palm tremble, and a trace of a smile appeared on Sinan's lips. Murong Qingga, this younger sister is more innocent than he thought. How did you get here? As soon as she entered the forensic department, the head of the department, Hanmu, saw them and spoke in a faint tone. In a hurry, I didn't see you deliver the remaining results. Sinan rolled his eyes. Isn't it me who's in a hurry? Hanmu pouted and threw the folder over. Can't you just talk? Sinan caught him speechlessly. As for people, they were killed by the explosion. Hanmu changed his sitting position and spoke, but there's something wrong with what's in their stomachs. Is it dinner the night before or breakfast that morning? Sinan raised his eyebrows and asked. According to the degree of digestion, it should be breakfast, but all 3 people's diets contain trace amounts of toxins. Hanmu looked at him and answered. Poisoned by someone. Sinan frowned and pondered, turning his head to look at Murong Qingli, who was silent beside him. Perhaps it was a means of forcing them to leave home. Murong Qingli hesitated and spoke. There's nothing else, let's go. Sinan shrugged nonchalantly, then stood up and waved to Hanmu before taking Murong Qingli away. End of this chapter. Chapter 9009. Re-Survey. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9009 Re-Survey, Team Leader, all the results are out, Chen Nua said wearily in the inspection room. I didn't find any valuable traces, but the same paper was burned in the trash cans at the scene of the explosion in Yuan Qingyi's house. Also, this set of keys should be a type of safe key, but Yuan Qingyi didn't find any safe at home. Chen Nua took a transparent evidence bag containing a set of keys and pointed to one of the slightly different keys, puzzled. Are the other keys aligned? Sinan took it over and frowned at the keychain in his hand, asking. Chen Nua nodded. You've worked hard, I'll take this for now and bring it back later. Sinan patted his shoulder and turned away with the relevant report and keychain. Wait a moment, go to Yuan Qingyi's house again, said Sinan with a slightly heavy tone as he walked out of the testing room and looked at the people around him. Do you think the safe is still at his house? Murong Qingli looked at the things in his hand in confusion. Previously, they had carefully surveyed Yuan Qingyi's home. Go again. Sinan didn't answer her, but insisted on going again. Boss, the car that went to the antique store last night had a license plate from Binhai, but according to records, this car often runs back and forth between Binhai and Bincheng. Returning to the office, Su Xiaotian immediately reported. Bincheng. Sinan was a bit surprised. Didn't he leave the province? You should know that most members of the Murong family live far away in the capital city of Yendu. Are those people going through several stops along the way? Murong, can we let them follow this line? Sinan thought for a while before turning his head to look at the people around him. Sure. Murong Qingli didn't hesitate, but those two looked a bit strange. Mississippi. Murong Xia approached and hesitated, shouting softly, I will be fine in Binhai. You should be careful when you go to investigate. Remember, only investigate in secret. Once you find something different, you should withdraw immediately and report it at any time. Murong Qingli shook his head and said firmly. Yes, the two of them exchanged a glance and responded together before leaving. Xiao Tian, you must keep in touch with Chen Gu and Lin Zheng. Officer Murong and I are going to visit Yuan Qingyi's house again, and you must not act rashly. Sinan raised his eyebrows and turned to Su Xiaotian, explaining everything before leaving again. Captain, they won't cause any trouble. It wasn't until Murong Qingli got on the car and fastened his seatbelt that he spoke again. I know. Sinan responded with a rare and serious tone, but it made Murong Qingli feel even more uneasy. Do you think they didn't listen to you and wouldn't listen to me? Murong Qingli couldn't help feeling anxious when he saw him start his car and leave the police station courtyard. Do you think either of us doesn't believe in each other? Sinan felt a bit helpless and had to turn his head to look at her. Aren't you not even believing in your brother now? Sinan. Murong Qingli widened his eyes sharply and let out a low cry of surprise. Here. Sinan couldn't help but cry and laugh, feeling a little heartbroken. She was already beautiful, and her once again pitiful expression was shattered by her thoughts, which was really unbearable. How could you do this? Murong Qingli saw his expression and turned his head to look outside the car, trying to hold back his tears and muttering in a slightly choked tone. Sinan didn't answer any more, giving her time to calm down. When she arrived downstairs from Yuan Qingyi's house and parked the car, Sinan's eyes were sharp as he scanned the surroundings. Qingli, are you feeling better? Seeing her still maintaining her previous posture, Sinan Yu asked with a warm expression. Sinan, have you ever thought about? Murong Qingli took a deep breath and slowly turned back, with a hint of pain in his eyes, hesitating to speak. Qingli, I haven't seen your father before, but your brother is not that kind of person. There's no need to doubt that, said Sinan with a more serious expression as he met her gaze. Let's go up and take a look first. There are some things that cannot be speculated upon without results. Seeing her staring blankly at her, Sinan sighed. Qingli, it's about your family. I can understand your feelings, but you have to show your level. Now, your brother and I are all by your side. I know. Murong Qingli nodded slowly. In the past 2 days of contact, she found that despite looking carefree, this Sinan was truly capable. His insight into human emotions alone was heart-wrenching. I think we might have to go to Yuan Bashan's house again, he said as he got off the car and looked up at the somewhat gloomy sky. Sinan's face also looked a bit uneasy. What did you think of? Murong Qingli walked up to him and looked at his expression with confusion. This day is getting colder and colder, maybe some things are becoming more convenient, said Sinan in a low voice, squinting his eyes. What's up? Murong Qingli was even more puzzled, not knowing what he was referring to. The pattern in the notebook in Yuan Bashan's office is related to that tomb, which dynasty? Sinan looked around again, stood still, and asked in a lower voice. At present, I only know that it was before Qin, and I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but... Murong Qingli spoke softly and hesitated. But what? Sinan's eyebrows lightly twitched, he really didn't expect it to be so long ago. By the way, the arrow that stabbed Yuan Bashan to death is said by experts from the Market Expo to be around 1,000 years old. According to the standard, the likelihood of it being used in the early Ming dynasty is relatively high. Speaking, Sinan abruptly stopped and slowly fell into contemplation. The weapon doesn't necessarily have to be. Murong Qingli listened to his words, pondering and speaking, but was stopped by him lifting his hand. Perhaps Yuan Bashan's problem is really serious, said Sinan coldly, taking a deep breath. Let's go upstairs. CDUI. As they stepped out of the elevator, four police officers saw them in the two hallways and immediately greeted them. It's hard, it's cold, pay attention to your health. Sinan nodded and walked to the door of Yuan Qingyi's house, looking at the person behind him. Murong Qingli nodded, put on the shoe covers with him, and walked in. Let's go to his study first. Sinan stood in the living room, calmly scanning around before taking a step towards Yuan Qingyi's study. There's nothing on this side, maybe it's in some cabinet. Murong Qingli said and began to search again. Qingli, wait. Sinan stopped her. Not looking. Murong Qingli supported the table, stood still, and looked at him with a puzzled expression. Do you have any information about the tomb you mentioned? I'll look for a safe, said Sinan while pondering. Oh, Murong Qingli responded and walked towards the nearby bookshelf. And surprisingly, Sinan also followed her towards the bookshelf. Do you suspect that they have set up a dark grid? Murong Qingli looked at the bookshelf and then at the person next to him with a cold expression. I've had a feeling since I was downstairs just now, Sinan said slowly, touching his chin and staring at the row of books on the bookshelf in front of him. There are many conflicting points at the scene of their family's death. Someone is confusing the audience. End of this chapter. Chapter 10:10. More discoveries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10:10 More discoveries, contradictions. Wanting to cover them up. Murong Qingli was completely confused by him. Qingli, the death of the four members of the Yuan family should have been intentionally thrown out to attract the attention of the police, Sinan pondered and spoke, but his tone sounded uncertain. But they need the Yuan Bo gentry. Murong Qingli shook his head to deny Sinan's statement, but he interrupted him once again. Do you know the entire process of purchasing and shipping from Murong's antique store? This. Murong Qingli bit her lip, knowing that Murong's antique shop also collects meditation vessels. Okay, I understand. Seeing her like this, Sinan nodded clearly. So, could you please ask if there are any other tombs besides the one you mentioned that are also being noticed now? I haven't heard of it, Murong Qingli shook his head. Is that right? Sinan closed his eyes and leaned against the bookshelf with a heavy stomach. After thinking for a while, Sinan picked up the set of keys again and frowned as he looked at them. Suddenly, Sinan stiffened all over, slowly stood still, looked at the row of books in front of him again, and then reached out to remove those books, revealing the shelf partition behind them. The two of them looked at each other, and Sinan reached out and lightly tapped twice. Then, he tried to move the baffle. Suddenly, Sinan's hand paused and his face trembled. He held on to the baffle and slowly moved to the left, revealing something behind him. Safe. Murong Qingli looked at the small safe and exclaimed in surprise. In addition to the key, a password is also needed. Sinan carefully looked at it and let out a long sigh, speaking somewhat dejectedly. Can this make it difficult for you? Murong Qingli blinked, feeling somewhat disappointed. How did you say that? Sinan pouted, I'm not a god. Why don't you give it a try? Sinan moved the safe down and placed it on the desk, then tilted his head to look at her. Murong Qingli responded and was about to walk over and sit down in a chair. Sure. Now it's Sinan's turn to be surprised. You wait next to me for a while. Murong Qingli took off his coat and gloves, took out a delicate small cloth bag from his backpack, and opened it. Inside was a set of unlocking tools. Seeing this, Sinan shrugged and leaned back against the bookshelf again, watching her with a serious expression as she began to unlock. Click. In less than 10 minutes, Murong Qingli paused and with a soft sound, the door to the safe opened. Amazing. Sinan praised and walked over to look at the contents of the safe with her. There is only one envelope in the safe, but judging from its thickness, there is indeed something inside. I'll come. Seeing Murong Qingli reaching out to take it, Sinan grabbed her hand and whispered. She took off her gloves, even to avoid leaving fingerprints, she had to do it for safety. Sinan carefully took out the envelope, took a step aside, and then carefully took out the contents of the envelope. Watching Sinan take out a stack of things that looked like photos, Murong Qingli quickly stood up and approached him. Isn't this something from the tomb this time? Murong Qingli muttered in confusion. To what extent have the tombs been excavated? Have you seen them all before? Sinan asked helplessly. I haven't explored much yet, Murong Qingli shook his head. But the era of these things is later. They really found other tombs. Murong Qingli looked up at the person next to her in shock. Nearly 20 ancient artifacts, can you tell if they are from the same batch? Although Sinan was skeptical, it was uncertain at the moment. I need to take a good look, Murong Qingli sighed. Just take a look, she can't be sure. Why do I see that there are no gold, silver, or jade objects here? Sinan opened a small notebook he took out of the envelope and asked again in his mouth. It's okay if there's no gold or silver, but there's no jade. Murong Qingli looked at the photo, her eyebrows tightening tighter and tighter. This kind of decoration doesn't seem like. Murong Qingli picked out one of them and put down the others, his face darkening as he looked at them. What doesn't it look like? Sinan raised his eyebrows and looked at her, thinking to himself, isn't this girl so accomplished in this area? It looks like it was from the Liao or Jin dynasties, and this kind of decoration seemed very rare in ancient Central Plains dynasties. Murong Qingli hesitated and said. I see that you are more powerful than Yuan Boss Hen. Sinan smiled and turned the notebook in her hand to show her the content. Is it really Liao? Murong Qingli was somewhat shocked. Can anyone really find them? However, according to the date recorded above, it should be the end of spring this year, Sinan nodded. It seems that this handwriting was recorded by Yuan Boss Hen. The one that is currently being excavated was discovered in the summer, Murong Qingli said with a heavy expression in her eyes. It only took 3 months to conduct external surveys, and even after opening the tomb door, something happened. Therefore, it is still uncertain whether there have been any thieves or tomb raiders inside. There is no record of the tomb's address on this note, otherwise someone else could have gone and taken a look. Sinan sighed low, put down his notebook, leaned on the table, and his face became increasingly cold. Their division of labor should be very clear, and Yuan Boss Hen may not be aware of it, Murong Qingli also sighed heartily. What is currently known is the father and son of the Yuan family and some members of the Murong family. With the situation of the father and son of the Yuan family, even if they are friends with your uncle, do they really have the ability to cooperate with them? Sinan turned his head and looked at the beautiful face very close to him, speaking calmly. If we can just throw them out like this, I'm afraid the father and son of the Yuan family are really not their partners. So they were threatened. Murong Qingli looked at him in contemplation and asked in a low voice. Many things cannot be confirmed now, sighed Sinan, packing up his things and carefully examining them. Let's go to Yuan Boshen's house to see if there are any hidden grids. After we finish, we'll take you to dinner. I don't know what information my brother will have. Murong Qingli looked at him with such a natural expression, almost blurting out that there was no need to delay things for her, but when it came to his mouth, it changed. Yeah, there's still half a day left, and I'm also very anxious. Sinan glanced inside the letter seal, confirmed to be repackaged, and carefully placed it in the evidence bag, putting it into his arms. Your brother is so appetizing. You talked so late last night, should you know more information? As he walked out of the building, a cold wind hit him. Murong Qingli always felt that if he didn't mention last night's incident, it should be related to himself. Previously, he clearly stated that he had not returned home for a year, which should have been told by his own brother. There's a question, Qingli. I've been curious about you ever since I saw you, but I'm not too afraid to ask. Sitting in the car, Sinan started the car, but leaned on the steering wheel and turned his head to look at her with a hint of playfulness. You dare not. Murong Qingli really wanted to give him a pair of white eyes. Based on your appearance, there are probably many people who want to pursue you. What kind of man do you like? Sinan slowly leaned in, suppressed a smile, and asked in a low voice. I don't know, have you ever beaten me? Murong Qingli looked at the person in front of her and spoke slowly in a low voice. Indeed, I couldn't help but laugh. Sinan was stunned and withdrew. Murong Qingli knew how nervous she had just been. End of this chapter.